"You're too ugly to attend my wedding." That sentence didn't just bruise, it rewrote the rules. In a single breath, years of quiet sacrifice were recast as an eyesore to be edited out of the picture. But what happens when the person you're trying to erase arrives anyway? Not to make a scene, but to lay down proof. This isn't a tale about shouting matches or flipped tables. It's about one steady choice after another, a folder stamped evidence, a forged signature exposed, and a day that changes course because truth shows up. Calm, documented, undeniable. If you've ever been shamed into silence or told your presence ruins the aesthetic, this story is your counterpunch. The power of paper over performance, consent over control, and integrity over image. Lean in. The first page cuts deep. What follows rebuilds the frame. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. I have lived long enough to read the weather by the smell of wood. Pine turns peppery when rain lifts, fur goes quiet like wool after a line dry. On a Tuesday in early May, the house I built with my hands held its breath. The roof ticked as cloud cover unstitched above Eugene, and a cool draft fingered the varnish along the window trim. I set an enamel kettle on the old gas stove, tuned the AM station to farm reports and minor league scores, and waited for the kettle's thin hiss that starts my day. My name is Arthur, Art Hayes. I am 67, a retired carpenter, a widower since the summer of 1997 when the hospital smell took over everything and would not leave. I still do small repairs for neighbors because I like the pace. Hinges that need shims, a gate that sags, a cutting board that wants planing and oil. I wear flannel and jeans and boots. I have resoled twice. Nothing I own photographs well. That used to comfort me. Morning light came in low over the Willamette and laid pale bands across my work table. The table is ash. If you look close, you can still see pencil ticks from the day I dry fit the apron 30 years back. Coffee steamed into the room. I drank standing up the way I always did in the shop and looked at the frames on the hallway wall. Evan with a too big helmet, Evan with dirt on his knees, Evan in a Chicago graduation robe with that weightless grin. I rested the mug's heat in my hands while memory did its slow work, sanding across time, revealing grain. I do not chase attention. My joy has always been to hold weight from the shadows, to be the unseen brace that keeps a thing square. But it matters to me to be present where life happens. A photograph is only a flash. A father in a folding chair at the back row still counts. There is a dignity in being there, even if no one writes your name on a caption. The phone rang. It had the sound of a truck downshifting on a grade. Ordinary, yet you feel it in your spine. I let it ring once more so the kettle would not boil over, then picked up. Through the faint digital delay of a speakerphone, my son's voice arrived polished and already mid-brief. "Dad, I think it's best if you don't come to Napa." For a breath, I thought a wire had crossed. I said I had a Navy suit that still held its press and I would sit in the back and shake hands with anyone who needed their hand shaken. There was a measured pause. "You don't really fit the aesthetic," he added. "Everything needs to be perfect." The words did not land in my ears so much as in my hands. A tight tremor moved over my knuckles as if the table had shifted a hair from square. I looked past the phone at the frames, the boy lifting a bat wider than his shoulders, the teenager whose cap sat crooked because he refused a mirror. The young man who once texted me his office view, skyline bright and remote. He kept talking gentle phrases about optics and brand and how certain relatives could complicate the look of the day. I listened. In the shop you learn wood speaks its stress before it splits if you are quiet enough to take the message. He said, "Please understand," and "We need control of the variables." He did not say the ugly word. The shape of his sentence said it for him. I told him again my suit was clean, my boots shined, my mouth closed. "We've decided it's not the right call," he replied. The "we" told me the rest of the room, Lila, her father, the planner, bending over a seating chart as if it were a cost sheet. My son was not the boy in those pictures. He was a stakeholder practicing risk management. I set the phone down and kept my palm on it, the way you steady a board you've just cut to see if it will creep. The coffee had cooled. It tasted of tin and time. Outside, a scrub jay hopped along the fence rail and clicked its beak, urgent and free of human arrangements. Inside, the kitchen's acoustics changed. The house sounded like a shop after everyone leaves, tools put away, electricity asleep, sawdust faintly sweet in the air. What I felt first was not anger. It was a hollowness, like a mortise drilled and left unfit too long. Edges clean, center empty, the piece that should join gone missing. I counted the brass screws along the table apron, 2, 4, 6, to settle my breath. Counting has a way of laying down a straight edge across a wobbly thought. By the time I reached 12, the tremor in my hands had gone, but the space it marked remained. I walked to the hallway and set 2 fingers on a frame. The glass was cool. Evan's dirt-smudged face looked back with a certainty you cannot buy or stage. In the reflection, I caught my own outline, a ghosted double exposure, an older man with creases and an uneven beard where a chisel once snagged my cheek. Somewhere, someone, not him alone, had decided that face was wrong for a picture. Perhaps the face had decided too after years of standing just outside the flash. When you over-tighten a joint, the failure hides. Fibers collapse inside while the corner gleams. I have seen tables that shine under showroom lights and crumble when a casserole slides an inch too hard. Surface is the last thing to tell the truth. That thought did not console me. It set a small, cold clarity, like a dowel seated home with 2 careful taps. I did not call back. I did not plead or negotiate. The house held still around me, and I let the stillness work. At this age, you learn the difference between a bruise that wants rubbing and a fracture that wants a splint. I rinsed the mug, dried it with a towel that has outlived 3 toasters, and set it lip down on the rack. The kettle had gone quiet. The burner clicked as I shut it off. In the study stands a walnut file cabinet. Behind that plain face are papers that prove a life can be planned without being advertised. Insurance I bought for myself, a scholarship fund for hands that like tools, a will that names the people who showed up when there was nothing to photograph. I did not open it. Not yet. I stood in the doorway long enough for the light to shift and for the stove heat to leave the room. A line had been crossed. Tomorrow would not look like yesterday, no matter how neatly anyone arranged the seating chart. I stayed there until the house found its breath again, and then I let mine follow. Silence has its own grain. After the call, it settled through the house like sawdust after a rip cut. Slowly, floating, then finding every ledge and groove. I switched off the AM radio and let the kettle cool on its ring, listening to the roof tick and the faint tap of branches along the gutter. The first ache had passed. In its place came a cleaner sensation, not outrage, but alignment, as if a bowed plank had relaxed flat on the bench. I did not call Evan back. Words would only skate the surface. This part required depth. Even in the quiet, the call replayed itself as texture, not content. I heard the room he was in more than the man himself, the crisp shuffle of paper, a pen cap clicking in little nervous bursts. the measured hush of a second voice correcting or approving. I know stage whispers. Whoever it was, Lila or a planner, had the cadence of someone managing a tableau instead of a family. Beneath that, I could swear I heard a baritone with boardroom weight, the kind of voice used to walk a deal across a finish line. Nobody said the ugly word, but it sat there, implied by aesthetic, brand, control the variables. When language starts building fences around a day meant for vows, someone intends to herd more than guests. I crossed the living room to the walnut file cabinet and drew the top drawer. The runners, rubbed with paraffin, slid smooth with a small, pleasing resistance. A sachet of cedar whispered from the back where I keep it to keep paper honest. Inside, manila lives, labeled, squared, edges flush. I have always believed that order is not vanity. It is courtesy toward your future self. First out was my will, the newest draft, clipped under a green tab with Mara Chin, Portland, typed along the top. She and I refined it 2 winters ago, a portion to the woodworking scholarship I'd seeded after selling half my old shop lot. Modest bequests to the folks who showed up when there were no cameras, instructions about tools, who should get the Lie Nielsen planes, who the old Stanley with the warm tote. The will did not name Evan as sole heir, not out of spite, out of observation. Love can be generous without being naive. Next, the long-term care policy. Premiums paid through the end of the year, inflation rider intact, contact numbers highlighted. I read the clauses the way I read a knot in oak, slowly, accepting the wood for what it is, not what I want. I have never needed anyone to place me. I bought my own safety net because I understand how quickly balance can go. The scholarship folder lay beneath, heavier with letters than numbers. Photos from graduations at community college shops, handwritten notes from people whose names nobody puts on donor walls, receipts for planes, chisels, tape measures bought at discount and mailed in simple boxes. After the accident closed the mill down south, a man named Earl used our fund to retrain and now signs his notes Earl Cabinetry. The comma, a thin bridge between past and possible. I added his most recent thank you to the top and closed the flap. The world insists on measuring what shows. Not everything that matters chooses to show. Behind those, a lease for a storage unit outside Sacramento where the air runs drier. I rented it to protect what paper and heat warp would spoil. My late wife's camera gear and the shoebox archive she kept, negatives, proof sheets, envelopes of double prints with dates penciled in the corner. Those images live outside the reach of social media, free of filters and likes, but they are faithful witnesses. If I needed to prove who raised a boy and how, the proof existed larger than memory. I sorted bank folders, conservative funds, a credit union account, the kind of balances that pay bills and buy nothing flashy. I logged into each portal, confirmed no stray subscriptions had chewed through the edges, and wrote policy numbers on a legal pad in tidy rows. Sticky flags in yellow marked what to bring, blue marked what to copy, red marked what to retrieve from the Sacramento unit if this turned into a matter not of feeling, but of record. While I worked, another memory knocked. Months back, Evan had emailed me a PDF under the subject hotel block, asking for a quick signature to guarantee rates for guests. The logo in the corner struck me as odd then. Less boutique hotel, more corporate holding company. I had not signed. I had told him I would book my room myself. Now the shape of that logo sat up in the mind like a nailhead proud of the board. I opened my laptop, searched my inbox for the thread, and started. No conclusions yet, only the promise of a closer read when I had calmer eyes and professional counsel. Process steadies me. When in doubt, I sweep the bench and set out tools in the order I'll need them. I laid the will, the long-term care policy, the scholarship file, and lease on the work table and made 3 columns with the carpenter's pencil. Show, copy, fetch. Under show, I wrote Mara's name and the phrase undue influence. because that was the plainest name for what my gut smelled in the air. Under copy, I listed everything with signatures and dates. Under fetch, I wrote Sacramento photos, then circled it. Only then did I call Mara's office. I need to revise some estate documents, I told the receptionist, and I'd like to discuss a potential case of undue influence regarding elder placement. When Mara came on, she said, "I have a slot later this week." I said that will do. Those were the only words I wanted in the world just then. The rest I put to paper, where panic has less room to move. I polished my boots until the toe showed the window's pale square, pressed the navy suit and hung it where it would not catch cooking smells, and slid a fresh legal pad beside my keys. I topped off the truck, checked the oil, and folded a map even though phones make maps feel antique. Preparation has the moral effect of prayer. It does not change the weather, but it changes the posture of the one who must walk through it. Before dusk, I printed a clean label and pressed it onto a fat manila folder. Evidence, block letters, square to the edge. I slid the will, the policy, the scholarship ledger, and a list of logins into it and set the folder beneath the window where morning light would find it. When I locked the cabinet, the key stayed a second warm in my palm. Outside, the river made its unreportable sound. Inside, the quiet reached all the corners. I would not be baited by insult. I would answer with proof. Tomorrow, the work would begin. By dawn the next morning, I was northbound on I-5, the truck humming a note that matched the low sky. The Cascades wore a sawtooth edge to the east, and mist hung in the fir stands like steam off a planer. Driving has a way of setting thoughts into dovetails. Pieces that rattle on a desk start to lock when miles pass under you. I carried the evidence folder on the passenger seat, seatbelt cinched across it the way I would strap a cabinet before a move. Portland rose out of drizzle, bridges, cranes, the river's hard shine. I parked a block from a brick building with a narrow brass plaque. Mara Chin, attorney. Her office felt like a well-laid bench, clean without showing off. A kettle on a warmer side. Plants held their green the way oiled walnut holds a glow. We shook hands and I placed the folder on her conference table, a laminate that had seen more arguments than meals. I spoke in order. The call, the words that weren't said but shaped everything, the sense of choreography behind my son's phrases. Mara listened to the way a finished carpenter listens for a burr in a blade. Still head-tipped, nothing wasted. She asked for a timeline, for exact language like aesthetic and control the variables, and for anything, email, PDF, paper, that touched the idea of placement. We started with my laptop. I logged in and pulled up the old thread labeled Hotel Block. The PDF sat where I had left it months ago, unopened because it smelled corporate when it should have smelled like hospitality. On her screen, the logo bloomed. Sloan Care Holdings, small print about hospitality support and preferred partners. No crown crest of a Napa Inn. Instead, a matrix of fields, event date, vendor list, number of rooms, line items that felt like ledgers rather than reservations. Down near the signature block, a line read guarantor/guardian of Groom's immediate family. I felt the fine muscles in my jaw find each other. I had not signed then. I had not signed ever. Mara took screenshots, saved the headers, and downloaded the PDF to a case folder she labeled with today's date. She spoke like a carpenter calling out measurements. 2 tracks, she said. The first was undue influence in elder placement. Any attempt to leverage me into a facility to secure unrelated benefits. The second was fraud or forgery if my name showed up where no pen of mine had been. She wanted every email from Evan on logistics, every invoice, any whisper of Sloan Care intersecting with wedding finance. We could move quickly with what we had, but we'd move cleanest with corroboration. My phone vibrated across the table. The name surprised me enough to say it out loud. Abby. Years ago, she used to send me holiday snapshots of Evan with a dog they fostered. Her voice now was careful, catching on the idea that she might be crossing a line. She said she once helped Lila proofread a vendor packet and had seen the words Silvercrest Residence, one of Sloan Care's properties, mentioned as a plan for after. She'd also heard Evan joke about a referral perk, the kind of brittle laugh people use when money makes them nervous. I shouldn't be involved, she said, but this smells wrong. She offered to forward what she had kept, a draft of the prenup with attachments. When the email landed, Mara printed and stapled and began the slow art of reading. Contracts hide their teeth in gray, not black. You find them in riders and definitions, not headlines. Inside a supplemental rider sat a cluster of phrases tied up in strings. Family long-term care alignment, partner credit, funding offsets, preferred network. There were no names, no bright signs, but the geometry suggested exchange. Sponsorship did not sit politely on a banner. It pressed itself into conditions. We turned the page, and then the addendum showed its real face. A side letter referenced Sloan Care by name. If a direct relative of the groom transitioned into a partner facility within 6 months of the wedding, Sloan Care would underwrite up to 60% of designated event costs. At the bottom floated a scan of a signature above my typed name. My R slant wrong, my H like a fence drawn by a hurried hand. Heat rose off the laser printer, and I realized it was from me. Mara did not look at me until she had photographed the page. "We'll preserve chain of custody," she said, "and we'll ask a judge for the one-word brand people hate." She let the word find its own weight. Injunction. We built the package. Her paralegal appeared like a clamp from a drawer you forgot you owned, quiet, firm, indispensable. Declarations, mine under penalty of perjury with dates and exhibits. Abby's statement reciting how and when she saw what she saw. The email headers, the hotel block PDF. The side letter, a chart showing the relationships. Evan to Lila to Victor to Sloan Care to me. Mara drafted a temporary restraining order request. No placement actions, no paperwork filed with any facility, preservation of all documents and communications, notice to Sloan Care to cease any use of my name or likeness for guarantees. She chose Napa County as the venue for filing, the way you choose a path through a tight joist bay. Shortest run, least obstruction. We paused only long enough for me to make one more call. Santiago picked up on the second ring, voice carrying the dryness of a man who lives with wind maps in his glove box. He said the venue had floated fireworks. Permits looked shaky given the drought. He would verify wind readings and be ready to step in. It wasn't my fight, not directly, but I have learned to brace for the load you can see coming. By mid-afternoon, the office smelled like coffee and toner. Pages marched out of the printer warm to the touch. Mara squared stacks, slid them into a red-spined binder, and labeled exhibits with tabs that clicked smartly under her thumb. I initialed each page of my declaration the way a builder initials studs before drywall, so the hidden work still bears a name. We scheduled an e-file for First Light and arranged for a courier to stand by. "We'll also send a litigation hold to Sloan Care," she said. "No shredders, no routine deletion. If they blink, a judge will want to know why." Before I left, we mapped the next move. I would drive south at dawn to the Sacramento storage unit and pull the photo archive, negatives, proof sheets, double prints with my late wife's neat graphite dates. Pictures have a testimony courts still respect. They show a boy and the hands that lifted him through seasons, no filter required. If anyone tried to script me as a man in decline, those boxes would answer. Outside, Portland rain began again, soft, steady, a sanding block of weather. I stood under the awning and felt the binder's edge through the canvas of my bag. Across the street, a bus hissed to a stop. A cyclist shook water from a sleeve. The city moved without noticing a hinge somewhere had been reset. Back inside, the printer whirred one final time and fell quiet. Mara closed the binder and set it beside the door. "We file at first light," she said. I nodded and stepped out into air that smelled of wet concrete and hot toner, the kind of smell that tells you something has been made that cannot be unmade. I woke before the alarm, the way you do when the day has a fixed shape and your only job is to fit into it. Beard trimmed even, gray hair combed back with water, I pressed the navy suit until the lapels lay calm as plain cedar. Boots took a fast shine. Into the canvas messenger bag went the red-spined binder, the evidence folder, a fresh legal pad, 2 pens, and a carpenter's pencil ground to a needle. I checked fluids, tire pressure, and the small cooler, water, an apple, a wrapped sandwich, then pulled onto I-5 before the light had climbed over the dug firs. Miles smooth thought. South of Salem, orchards blurred to a workable rhythm. Beyond Grants Pass, the highway pitched into long, steady inclines, and the truck found its note. I kept the cruise modest. This wasn't a chase, it was a delivery. At Redding, I slid into a print shop I'd used back when I hauled furniture downstate. A low room with the sugar-warm smell of fresh toner, counters nicked by box cutters, the mutter of industrial printers working through queues. The clerk recognized the trade before the face and nodded toward the self-serve bays. I scanned the flash drive and watched pages bloom, black on white, proof stacking toward a story you could hold. I built 2 books. Part A. First, Evan in Little League dust with his too big helmet, Evan at the science fair holding a foam board solar oven, Evan under a tassel he thought made him look serious, Evan on the day he left for Chicago, a duffel slung as if it were lighter than the look he gave back over his shoulder. Dates, places, a line or two to orient. No captions that begged a point, only the honesty of time passing. Part B. Next, the hotel block headers showing Sloan Care where a Napa Inn should have been. The writer language about family long-term care alignment. The side letter that turned a daughter's wedding into a financing event. My forged signature, wrong in the R, impatient in the H. The cover of the TRO request with its square, courthouse font. I bound them back-to-back under a linen cover, neutral gray, the way you dress work that needs to be taken seriously. 2 miles away, a warehouse-style hardware store kept a good wood aisle. I bought soft, close hinges and felt pads, then drove to a shady edge of a lot where swallows nested under the eaves. From the truck bed, I slid out a walnut blank I had rough fit months earlier for no particular reason beyond habit. Some men carry pocket knives. I carry potential boxes. With a sanding block, I took the last chatter out of the lid, wiped the dust with an old t-shirt, and fixed the hinges until the top settled like a quiet thought. Inside, I set a shallow tray with a finger groove so the album would lift easily. I cut a thin slot under the tray, just wide enough for a business card and a note. On the lid, I burned, "For Evan from Dad." The letters browned and cooled, and the grain gathered them the way a river holds stones. By mid-afternoon, I dropped into Napa Valley, the hills of velvet dryness that pretended it green where the irrigation still worked. I took a cheap motel off the main road, thin towels, clean sheets, an iron that didn't spit. I pressed the shirt again and cleaned my glasses until the frames flashed. At golden hour, I drove a loop around the venue, white ribbons already cinched on chairs, a tent like a sail, valets rehearsing hand signals. I watched the staff corridor where trays would pass and made note of a small lounge where a best man might take a breath. Recon, not spying. Woodworkers learn rooms by their joints. In the parking lot of a coffee place 2 miles away, I met Darren. He wore the kind of grin men use to cover a bad hand. I set the walnut box on the table between us. He touched the lid with the backs of his fingers, as if it were a creature that might startle. "You sure?" he said. "Victor's the kind of guy who fixes things." "This isn't a scene," I said. "It's a mirror." He nodded at the red tabs peeking from the album's edge. "When?" "Morning of," I said. "From your hands to his, no intermediaries. Tell him to open it alone. Start with the first half. Then the second." Darren drew a slow breath and slid the box toward himself as if it weighed more than walnut. "Okay?" He tapped the inscription. "He'll see this before he sees anything else." I didn't tell him that was the point. I told him thank you and left before we became two men trying to say a second thing neither of us needed to say. Back at the motel, I wrote a paragraph on a plain card and tucked it inside the album's first page. "I came to bless your day and to tell the truth without raising my voice." Under the tray, I slid Mara's card and a note. "Call her before you sign or shred anything." In the glove box, I stowed a duplicate USB of every PDF, and I slipped another into the inner pocket of my jacket. Phones fail. Paper speaks. Redundancy is mercy for your future self. The sun went down, rasping along the ridgelines. I called Santiago. He said permits were still under review and the wind map for tomorrow looked tricky. "We'll be there," he said. "Tell me if you see something off." I thanked him. Then I called Mara and gave a brief status. The album assembled, the courier lined up for the e-filing at first light the next business day. My plan to sit in the back row and only stand if spoken to. "Document improper contact," she said. "Otherwise, silence is not consent, but it is a strategy." I laid the suit across the chair and centered the walnut box on the desk. The lid caught the lamplight and returned it without glitter. In the mirror, I could just make out the man I have been all my life, creased, steady, a little out of place in rooms designed for photographs. I set the alarm early and slid between motel sheets that smelled faintly of bleach. Outside, a car door thumped. Voices passed, ice rattled in a bucket. The valley took another breath. Tomorrow, I would walk in, choose a shadow, and let evidence speak where I wouldn't. Morning in Napa had a brittle shine, as if the light itself could snap. Ribbons along the aisle snapped faintly in a dry breeze, and the florals gave off a sweetness that couldn't quite drown the smell of dust rising from the gravel lot. I arrived early, gave my name to an usher with the posture of a traffic cone, and took the last pew, the back row, far right, where the aisle lay in a clean line to the altar. From there I could see the whole stage, the violinist worrying one stubborn note, the photographer stepping like a heron, the planner hovering with a headset that made her look like air traffic control for bouquets. Up front, Victor Sloan held his seat the way men hold deeds, chin set, shoulders arranged for the camera. Lila was luminous and taut at the jaw as if grace required bracing. Evan stood handsome and polished, the tuxedo doing exactly what the tailor promised. The smile he wore had weight only at the lips. When his gaze skimmed the room and snagged on me, something unfastened for a breath. He tucked it back with a blink. The processional began. The vows were well written, full of honor and care, and holding one another in hard seasons. From the back row, the language rebounded like a plank flexing under a load it wasn't cut for. Joinery can look flush at 20 feet. If the tenon creaks in the pocket, you hear it before you see it. The homily spoke about family as a shelter. The violin found the note at last. Faces softened, camera shutters clicked like a soft metronome. After the kiss, the room emptied toward champagne and shade. I stayed put until the aisle cleared. Darren brushed my shoulder in passing, a tiny pressure that said the walnut box had gone hand to hand. I stood and followed a staff member's nod down a side corridor where servers drifted in and out with trays, where the air smelled of lemon polish and nervousness. They left me at a small lounge. The carpet was the kind meant to forgive spills. A credenza held a tired fern and a stack of programs. Evan stood by the window with the album open in his hands. The first half had put salt at the edges of his eyes. On the credenza, the second half lay open to a page that didn't need an attorney to explain it. The Sloan Care header, the rider language, the side letter promising underwriting if a groom's direct relative transitioned within 6 months. My name floated beneath a signature that leaned wrong in the R and fenced the H too tightly. He didn't greet me. He asked it like a breath. "Where did you get these?" "Where they were left," I said. My hands rested on the chair, back to keep from doing anything else. The door opened hard. Victor entered with the planner and a man in a dark suit who carried his jaw like a briefcase. Victor's voice had ice in it. "You're making a mess of our day." I did not look at him. I placed copies on the table one at a time, building a sequence a judge might respect. The hotel block PDF with Sloan Care where an INS logo should have lived. The phrases in the rider, family long-term care alignment, preferred network, funding offsets. The side letter offering to underwrite up to 60% upon my transition. The scan of my supposed signature. I slid a single-page cover, TRO request, time-stamped, to the credenza's edge. "This file's at first light," I said, "before any paper moves me anywhere." Victor exhaled a laugh without humor. He said words like standard hospitality support and misunderstanding. The man beside him added the kind of phrases that mean nothing until they hit a billing sheet: alignment, offsets, network efficiencies. The planner tried for logistics, timelines, sequences, the necessity of getting the couple to the grape arbor for photos. She was rearranging chairs while a beam questioned its rating. Evan flipped between a photo of himself in Little League dirt and the page with my name signed by a stranger. He looked like a man trying to speak 2 languages at once in a country that tolerated neither. He whispered, "Dad?" and could not find the country. I didn't argue taste. I do not win those fights and would not play them if I could. I spoke consent and leverage, the only vocabulary that matters when people begin to move other people around like furniture. "I have long-term care coverage I bought myself," I said. "I do not consent to placement. Any use of my name is disputed under oath. Any structure that depends on moving me is not care. It is pressure." My phone buzzed. I set it on the credenza and tapped speaker. "Mara," I said. "We're in the room." She didn't waste air. "Abby just sent a supplemental side term," she said. Paper sounded in her background. "It's a soft guarantee. If no long-term care alignment occurs within 90 days, the wedding support converts to a personal loan in Evan's name via Sloan Care Finance. Penalty interest triggers at day 91. Her voice leveled. "This reads quid pro quo tied to elder placement. Courts do not enjoy this." Victor told me to turn the phone off. I left it on. Mara added, "I'm appending the term to the TRO. If anyone approaches you about any quiet relocation today, step out and call me. Also, I am issuing litigation holds to Sloan Care." Another buzz overlapped the first. Santiago's text lit the screen. "Wind up, permit likely denied, fireworks off." From the hall came the audible shift when a plan loses its centerpiece, a rise and fall of voices like a fire trying and failing to catch. Dry land does not humor sparks. At some point, neither does a family. 3 points, I said, because listing steadies rooms. I can pay for my care. I do not consent. And I'm not collateral. I touched the album's groove with a thumb to put my hand somewhere. "Surface," I said, "is the last thing to tell the truth." The door eased again and Lila slid into the corner of the frame, breath held, veil gathered like a wing. She looked at the forged page, then at Evan. "Did you know about a loan?" she asked him, soft enough to pass for a prayer. She looked to Victor instead of to the groom when she wanted an answer. That glance wrote a new sentence on her face. Victor tried one more pass. He suggested I step outside for the rest of the day, that he would take care of the paperwork later. The word later did the work of a shove. I set Mara's card gently atop the page with my false name. "I'll leave this lounge," I said, "not the truth." From the binder, I slid a litigation hold notice. If the man in the dark suit had a card, this was his date stamped into it. Darren knocked, his voice small through the jam. The receiving line was stalling. Staff needed the groom back now. Evan looked at the album, then at Victor, then at me. He set the book down. Beyond the door, the clink of flutes sounded bright against a wind that wanted to lift the tent. Inside, the air vent lifted paper edges so they fluttered a fraction. On the credenza, the wrong R and the fenced H lay still, waiting for daylight and a judge. If you're still watching and the quiet victories resonate, please comment one below to let me know you're with me. There's a new way forward. Air thinned in the little lounge after Darren's knock, as if the room had used up its ration and was waiting on somebody's decision to breathe again. The album lay between us like a board split with a wandering grain, mendable if you cut true, worthless if you force it. The air vent lifted the page corners by a fraction and let them fall, a slow ticking metronome. Lila's veil trembled where it caught a draft. Evan's thumb kept finding the groove along the walnut lid as if it were a worry stone. I counted that heartbeat of a pause the way I count brass screws along an apron, not to stall, but to steady the cut. Evan moved first. He reached past the album to the planner's clipboard, tore a sheet free with a clean rip, and took the pen like a man signing for a delivery no one else would claim. He wrote in block letters that left no room for beautiful confusion. Cancel Sloan Care sponsorship. Keep the ceremony. Revise the guest list. The date went under it. His name followed, not the printed kind that lives in fonts, but his own hand, imperfect and alive. He slid the sheet across the credenza and placed it squarely over the forged signature. Living ink atop counterfeit. That was the hinge. The planner reached for the paper, then hesitated, then reached again. Evan's voice had a new flatness I recognized from men who stop asking permission. He told her to implement. She began to discuss sequencing. He repeated the same word with less air and more gravity. She nodded like someone who had just discovered which door in a hallway actually opens. I took the litigation hold notice from my binder and set it in front of the man in the dark suit. He read the first line and blinked, a small concession that showed he knew which game had entered the room. I took a quick photo of Evan's note with my phone and texted it to Mara with 2 words, "In effect." Her reply came fast enough to feel planned. Appending now, she would file the amended TRO first thing and send formal notice withdrawing any hospitality support tied to me. Procedures have the mercy of rails and fog. You do not have to see far to move true. Victor made one more push across the worn carpet, voice pitched to sound reasonable for microphones that were not in the room. He spoke of sunk costs and obligations and made the word impulsive do the work of a slur. I kept my voice even. Conversion to a loan, I said, was not an afterthought. It was the evidence. Courts like clean lines. He tried to make numbers into weather no one could help. Consent does not melt like that. Lila stepped out from behind his shoulder as if she had discovered that shadow had sides. She asked him whether he knew about the loan conversion. He gave a sentence shaped like an answer that did not answer. The micro crack ran another inch. She turned back to Evan not for permission but for company. It looked small, and it was not. Evan thumbed his phone, called Darren, and with the steadiness of a foreman tasked him with the guest list that actually fit the day. The Little League coach and any of the old teammates within an hour's drive, the neighbors who helped dig out a stuck car in the snow that winter in high school, the apprentices from the scholarship list who could come on short notice. He handed the planner her part, announce a brief reset, shift the photo block, reroute the receiving line. Her headset crackled as she translated choice into logistics. Noise rippled outward through the venue like wind touching wheat. I gave Darren the bundles I had prepared 2 nights back, names, numbers, short notes that would help a stranger get the right voice the first time. Redundancy paid for itself within the minute. He said he was already dialing. You could hear the muscle of the day change, less choreography, more lift and carry. Evan turned toward me, and for a second the room's heat lowered. He asked for forgiveness with a look that understood forgiveness was not spare change kept in a dish by the door. I laid a boundary that could hold both of us. Love is a verb, I said to myself, and today it looks like a clean choice, not a speech. Aloud, I told him to run his event to proceed for the 2 of them, not for optics, and that I would sit in the back row and not approach unless I was asked. He nodded. A good joint sets under its own pressure once the faces are plain true. You clamp, then you wait. A text from Santiago cut through with the blessed straightforwardness of a fire code. Fireworks denied, wind high, program amended. Somewhere outside, a plan that wanted sparkle found itself exchanging spectacle for safety. I felt a private agreement with the air. When you remove the flourish you cannot control, structure begins to tell the truth about what it can hold. The planner's whispers turned to instructions. The comms lit up with reroutes. A few guests with cameras for eyes drifted toward the parking lot. Others shrugged, settled, and asked where they could be useful. Lila came close enough that I could see the stitchwork along the edge of her veil. She said almost to herself that she would proceed for us, not for a brand. It was not an embrace. It was a condition. Sometimes that is the footing a life needs. I rebuilt my own order on the small table. Copies back into the red-spined binder, forged page, flagged as Exhibit A, Mara's card tucked at the front. I photographed the scene from waist height. Album closed now, Evan's instruction visible, faces turned down. Record without spectacle. The habit felt like the kind of prayer old men keep when they have learned the difference between noise and witness. Evan lifted the album and nested it once more into the walnut tray. His thumb rested a heartbeat on the lid where I had burned "For Evan" from Dad. Then the lid came down with a soft finality of hinges that fit. He handed the box to Darren, who had reappeared to report that the coach was en route in a pickup with 2 former infielders and a bag of sunflower seeds, and that 3 apprentices were 30 minutes out in a dented sedan with a trunk full of goodwill. The new guest list was already driving. We left the lounge as if it had been a workshop where cuts were measured and made. Evan and Lila stepped toward the receiving line. I stepped the other way, back along the corridor to the far row, where the air felt less staged. The tent breathed against its rigging. The headset in the planner's hair snapped something about updating flow. Past the chairs, a dust devil rose, spun itself into a loose rope of grit, and let go. I sat down where I had started the day and felt the pocket weight of the spare USB, small proof that if the wind took one thing, another would remain. The album was closed. The note was signed. The choice had been made, and the consequences were already finding their seeds. From the back row, I watched the day reassemble itself with the unshowy competence of a good crew. A staffer rolled away 2 plastic crates stenciled PYRO in block letters. Another man unspooled an extension cord from a dance floor corner and coiled it tight like a lariat no one would throw today. The quartet shrank to a trio when the second violinist was sent to help carry water coolers. You could hear the volume of conversation drop and then find a new key. Less sparkle, more human pitch. I took note of the headset chatter as logistics replaced choreography. Flip the arbor, move the appetizers, no launch window. The vineyard looked better without the promise of fire. Guests sorted themselves the way hardware sorts in a drawer you shake once. A glossy handful drifted toward the valet circle with apologies about timing and flights. The largest share sat back down and waited to be told where to stand next. A handful began to help without being asked, sliding cafe tables into a long run, straightening folding chairs, ferrying pitchers of lemon water from a bar that had stopped pretending cocktails could fix the wind. The arrivals changed the weather. A pickup eased in at the service entrance with a bat bag in the bed and a dent in the door nobody felt compelled to buff out. Evan's Little League coach climbed down, the same man who years ago taught a row of boys to take grounders without flinching and to put their name on the scorebook without adding stars. Two old teammates followed, bigger now but still wearing the same sideways grins, sunflower salt on their fingers. They shook my hand at the aisle end with the uncomplicated respect you give the father who showed up at cold games. Then the apprentices, 3 from the scholarship list, shirts tucked as best they could manage, hands ready. They moved like someone had always told them what to do, and they finally trusted themselves to do it. In 5 minutes, the venue's round tables were replaced by a communal run that made room for elbows and shared plates. I stayed seated, nodding when someone glanced my way, letting recognition pass between us without the boast of a performance. Presence can be enough if you let it. My phone buzzed with a clean line from Mara. Amended TRO is queued for the first business morning. Litigation hold sent. Return receipts captured. She added a sentence that served as both instruction and benediction. Document calm. I replied with a photo taken low and square of the pyro crates being strapped to a dolly and wheeled out, timestamp visible in the corner. Evidence of prudence can be as persuasive as evidence of harm. At a distance near the valet shade, Victor worked 2 phones with a posture like rebar, rigid, confidence poured around a core that had forgotten how to bend. I watched him build a new story for someone who needed a story. Misunderstanding, supply issues, the couple's artistic pivot. The planner refused to be drafted into that script. She repeated one line with professional neutrality. The couple has adjusted the program. Around me, the vocabulary lightened. I heard fewer sentences about optics and more about making it work. A woman in a pale suit crossed the lawn without drawing the wind. She did not move like the crowd. She moved like a verdict she hadn't wanted to deliver. Lila's mother stopped at my row and sat, leaving a respectful gap between us as if to show she understood boundaries someone else had already tested. She held a plain envelope of the kind that hides in desks and refuses brand stationery. "For your lawyer," she said, voice low. "I can't watch him do this to another family." I did not reach too quickly. She opened the flap just enough to reveal spreadsheets with column headers I recognized from my years of balancing small shop books, and memos that used neutral words to describe gross practices, hospitality offsets, partner rate harmonization, market-aligned adjustments. Dates and departments were printed across the top in a way that made the documents hard to dismiss as rumor. "Thank you," I said, and let 2 words hold all the weight they could bear. She nodded once and walked back into a life I had no right to narrate. I slid the envelope into the binder, flagged the first page, Exhibit B, and texted Mara. Internal docs via Family Insider, chain of custody to follow. She answered in seconds, received, log time and location, keep originals flat. I put the binder under my chair and felt the paper cool against my shoe. The reception, smaller now, grew truer. Evan and Lila re-entered to a cheer that warmed instead of dazzled. His toast was short and useful. He said they would build a life that could stand in a wind without sparklers to distract from the strain. The coach offered a blessing that was more instruction than prayer. Keep your feet under you, square your shoulders to the ball, forgive the hop you don't see. The apprentices passed bread and water with the solemnity of people who remember thirst. A neighbor rolled a cooler from his trunk, ice clinking like a promise kept. The photographer, freed from a shot list, began to catch moments that looked like a life. Creased smiles, hands touching work, a dress hem pinned back with a borrowed safety pin. Evan passed within 2 steps of my row, stopped, and held my eyes. "Thank you," he said, not pushing the word toward apology, not tugging at me for more. You chose, I answered, and let the sentence end there. We did not hug. We did not perform the bridge we might build later. Some crossings require scaffolding you can't erect in an afternoon. I secured the new envelope behind the flagged forged page and snapped 2 waist-high photos. First sheet, sealed flap, for the record. Santiago confirmed the wind stayed up and the permits had died a quiet death. He thanked the venue for adjusting and signed off. I checked the truck once during a lull. The glove box USB gleamed faintly in the late light like a fish in clear water. Social weather shifted further. Stories at tables pivoted from what almost went wrong to who showed up. Laughter sounded less like release and more like agreement. A sun-faded dad with careful knees started a loose line dance that never lined up and did not need to. Some guests left and were not missed. Head count dropped. Warmth rose. At dusk, the hills softened. Cafe lights came on in a chain that made the wind look like a friendly thing. Under them, Evan and Lila stood with their foreheads close, their faces unguarded and ordinary in a way photography seldom loves, but marriage often requires. I felt the fatigue that follows precision set in, bone deep, honorable, as if a long clamp had come off a glue-up and the joint held. Under my chair, the red spine of the binder cooled. Tomorrow, a clerk's stamp would warm it again and paper would become part of the outside world's weather. Tonight, the day had decided what it meant without me raising my voice. Courthouses wake before the rest of a town. At first light, I parked beneath a plane tree outside the county annex, the leaves clacking like a loose chain, and carried the red-spined binder through a glass door that breathed conditioned air. Fluorescence gave the hall a soft hum. A clerk behind bulletproof glass slid a tray through the slot, and I fed the amended TRO packet across. Blue backer, exhibits in order, Evan's handwritten instruction copied clean and square. Rubber stamps thudded. The laser printer exhaled heat. A notary applied a raised seal to my declaration. I felt the crimp under my thumb and thought how proof becomes tactile when the world wants to argue with it. When the e-file confirmation pinged my phone, the timestamp drew a straight line between what had happened in a vineyard and what would enter the public record. On the steps, I called Mara. She sounded like a runner at the starting pistol. She would notice Sloan Care, request an ex parte date, and narrow the ask. No relocation, preserve all records, identify the author and distribution list for the side letter. Zero contact with Victor's team, she said. If they reach out, forward it. I told her I would keep the lanes clean and hung up into a morning that smelled faintly of toner and wet stone. I texted Evan and Lila. Filing complete. Your written direction included. Proceed with your life. I'll handle the paper. His reply came fast. Thank you. We're with you on record holds. Hers followed. We'll cooperate with the court. I did not read extra meaning into brevity. In carpentry and elsewhere, short lines carry more weight when you trust what's underneath. The drive north to Eugene unspooled like a pressure bleed. The truck's small rattles reintroduced themselves one by one. The glove box latch, a bolt tinny against the floorboard, and I welcomed the familiar chorus. At home, I drained the oil while it was still warm, swapped the filter, and watched the dark stream thin to a polite drip. The navy suit went to the line, wind-pressing creases that would iron flatter later. The walnut tools I'd left out for the box went back into their tills. Their heft recalibrated my grip to ordinary life. By afternoon, I was south again to the Sacramento unit, moving like a librarian through my late wife's archive. Negatives in archival sleeves. Proof sheets slipped into acid-free folders. Double prints labeled in her careful pencil. Dates, locations, names that do not trend. I logged chain of custody in a notebook, box numbers, time, temperature of the unit. Because what you cannot remember, the notebook will. Originals returned to the shelf, copies nested in the binder. I locked the roll-up door and stood in the dust-sweet dark, long enough to hear my own breath. The neighborhood coffee shop welcomed the rest of the day back into my hands. The Little League coach tapped my shoulder on his way north, paper cup in one hand, a ball bucket in the other. "Showing up beats showing off," he said. "Always has." I nodded. That could have been the whole statement for the week. A photo arrived from the apprentices, a long table they'd helped set, bread and water and elbows side by side. I replied with next week's shop hours and a note. Open bench, open questions. A reporter from a Napa Weekly emailed about guest list changes and the fireworks denial. I kept the story narrow. The couple acted prudently and independently, the rest belongs to the court. Mara echoed it to whoever asked her office for color. You learn to protect structure by refusing to decorate it with drama. At my desk, I wrote to my son by hand. One page on cream paper I reserve for telling the truth to people I love. I did not recap or publish a ledger of hurt. I wrote 3 clear boundaries. I would handle the legal path cleanly and without spectacle. I would not be drawn into the optics of his marriage. That belongs to him and his wife and no one else. And there is a place at my table, no scripts, no cameras, on any ordinary night he chooses to knock. I slid a photocopy of the scholarship roster behind the letter, then a photo of his first bat with my pencil marks on the grip, proof that hands learn to hold weight before they learn to hold a pose. The private number reached me early evening. Lila's mother, voice steady now that she had stepped over her line. She confirmed she had given the documents knowingly, that she would be seeking independent counsel. "Thank you for not turning it into a scene," she said. "Scenes leave smoke and no shape." I told her all future exchanges must go through Mara, for her protection as much as the record, and thanked her without ceremony. We ended the call with a silence that felt like dignity. Preparation is the trade that holds my bones together. In the shop, I rehearsed testimony aloud, facing the workbench as if it were a witness box. Facts only, clean joints, no adjectives to swell the fibers. I do not consent. I purchased coverage. I discovered a forged signature. I delivered notice. I arranged exhibits in order on the bench as if laying out boards for glue-up. A, the forged page. B, internal memos and spreadsheets. C, email headers and hotel block PDF. D, Evan's written instruction. The red binder stayed home. I packed a slim folder with the live pieces a judge's eye could digest at speed. Everything else would wait behind me like a well-stocked wall cabinet. Unused if not called for, ready if it was. I answered a final text from Santiago. 0 incidents. Wind calmed after sunset, and felt something release in my back that had been tight since the first call. Then I went to work with Walnut because Walnut returns a man to himself. The plane took a thin, obedient ribbon, the curl lifting and falling in a soft arc. Proof that fiber finds its own truth if the blade is set right and you don't rush the pass. Shavings gathered at my feet like punctuation. My phone lit the bench with a small square of kitchen light. Evan's photo of 2 bowls, steam rising, him and Lila at a table without flowers or stagings, just spoons and a napkin folded imperfectly by someone trying to make it right. No caption, none needed. I set the plane down, turned off the radio, and closed the shop. Out on the porch, the evening had the generous quiet of a case that will now walk on paper while life learns its new gait. I locked the door, checked the spare key in my pocket, and let the house breathe as if it, too, had stayed steady in a wind and was pleased to discover that its bones still held. The courthouse hearing fit into a single morning, the way a clean cut takes one pass when the blade is set right. We stood in a narrow courtroom with high windows and a clock that ticked like a metronome for restraint. The judge read the filings in the slow, chewing way of someone who trusts paper more than performance. She granted the temporary restraining order and extended it. No placement, no intake paperwork, no pre-admission screenings, No quiet transfers by any network affiliate. She ordered preservation of all communications and drafts, and she wanted the authorship chain for the side letter. Who wrote it? Who approved it? Who received it? When the forged page reached her, she tapped the margin with a capped pen and said the words, "Forensic Review." Discovery dates were set like joists on 16-inch centers. She did not lecture. She did not need to. The record spoke and the room respected it. Sloan Care's counsel acknowledged receipt, their suit fabric whispering as they stood. The litigation hold was confirmed on the record. Servers, phones, vendor portals, nothing deleted. There was a shift in posture when Exhibit B, those internal spreadsheets and memos, was identified. It wasn't panic, just the precise tightness of people counting backward through the emails they had forwarded too freely. Outside the courtroom, Mara exhaled once and said the next part would be slow and exacting. On the drive home, I felt relief like a clamp released, the joint held. Now you let the glue cure. Weeks have a way of turning loud things quiet. An internal memo surfaced in the business press. Victor Sloan stepped down as CEO for personal reasons, the board promising cooperation with any and all inquiries. I read it the way a carpenter notes a failed beam hauled out through a door, too small for it. No gloating, no fist pump, just an observation that structure sometimes improves when an overconfident member is removed and the load redistributes to honest timber. We marked the end of the beginning with a supper in Eugene. No announcements, no hashtags, just bowls and steam. Evan and Lila arrived carrying a pie from the neighbor's bakery. The Little League coach came by after practice, sun in the stitching of his cap. 2 apprentices brought salad in a thrifted bowl and stood in the doorway until I told them to sit wherever. A neighbor set a roast chicken on the table and went to hunt plates without asking a single aesthetic question. The Walnut Box sat on the mantel. Inscription forward, the album inside closed. You do not have to reopen the book each time to know it exists. In the kitchen, Evan offered an apology measured for the room we were actually in. No positioning, no vows about forever. He named what he had done and what he hadn't known. I answered without liturgy. We would let time prove the truth of new choices. Love is a verb, and verbs decline over seasons. Lila thanked me for restraint and said the documents her mother shared were her mother's to share. We left it there, adults who had chosen sentences that could stand without scaffolding. After supper, someone asked for a picture, and we let it happen on 2 conditions. Porch steps, natural light, no retouching. We stood where the boards creak, the apprentices flanking the coach, the neighbor's pie cooling on the rail. A small dog wandered into frame and sat on Evan's shoe, undecided about loyalty and perfectly at peace with that. The shutter clicked once, line showed. A few hairs did what hairs do. I liked it because it looked like a life and not a brochure. Community wove tighter in small stitches. One apprentice said he had landed a cabinet shop job over in Springfield. Another had enrolled at the community college for drafting and asked if he could still come to shop nights. We set dates with pencil and shook on them like people who still believe in hands. The coach left a scuffed ball on my bench for luck, then corrected himself for memory. I kept it where I could see it, a round reminder that not all arcs are parabolas. Some are circles you return to on purpose. I went back to teaching weekly, chalking grain diagrams on a plywood board and showing how earlywood and latewood telegraph what a board wants to do under pressure. I tell the class that appearances are not the same as strength, that a glossy face hides a crushed core if someone over-tightened the clamp. Sometimes, when talk drifts toward patience, I bring out a copy of the album's first half and lay a picture from the Little League years beside a recent one of a finished cabinet. Time and care make their own finish. Students nod not because the metaphor is novel, but because their hands already know it. I kept my long-term care policy current, updated emergency contacts to include Mara, and put a slim folder by the front door with documents a paramedic might need someday. Independence remains my plan, not my protest. A pair of outlets printed items about leadership changes at Sloan Care and the opening of a regulatory review. My name appeared once as a relative, and that was fine with me. Through Mara's office, we issued one sentence. We're grateful for the court's attention, and we trust the process. There is honor in letting paper carry what paper can carry. I wrote a short second letter to my son. One paragraph about consistency. That choice repeated becomes character, the way a cut repeated becomes a joint you can count on. One line inviting him to stop by on Thursdays when the shop is open, no scripts needed, no need to perform. He texted back a photo later that evening, the walnut box on a shelf near their kitchen table, the inscription catching lamplight. Kept where we see it, the caption read. That was enough. Evenings returned to their craft. I planed a narrow strip of cherry and let the curl rise like ribbon and fall at my boots, the sound a small river over stone. On the desk beside the vise, the porch picture dried to matte, creases, stray hairs, the dog half blurred, no one centered and everyone present. I looked at it and felt a quiet that did not ask to be named. Appearances, weather, integrity, seasons. Seasons are the way a life learns to stand. I switched off the shop light and let the dark enter like completion, not erasure, and the house answered with its old timbers the way it has always done, here, here, here. What remains when noise burns off is the grain. The last months taught me that dignity is not a favor extended by the young or the rich. It is scaffolding you erect in advance, bolt by bolt. So the weather that does come cannot bargain it away. Consent is not a variable to be tested in a spreadsheet. It is the hinge on which every decent door turns. And love, untethered from respect, sours into leverage so quickly you don't smell the change until it stains the floor. I learned to trust presence over optics. A father in the back row can add more weight to a day than 100 retouched photos because bodies, not images, hold integrity. I am not furniture to be relocated for a cleaner shot. I kept my plans, policies, wills, the scholarship, the archives. So I could say no without shouting. What worked was paper, not volume. I chose timestamps, chain of custody, and a red spine binder instead of speeches designed to trend for an hour and evaporate by dusk. A scanned page with a wrong R and fenced H moved a judge more than any righteous paragraph ever could. I think about the steps. Open the cabinet, sort what you have, label the manila, print 2 copies, photograph the handoff, breathe. When people weaponize image, answer with facts. When someone tries to fold you into an alignment, make a record, not a scene. A stamp on a blue backer changes the weather in a room faster than anger does, and the change lasts. Aging has its story told badly by people selling fear or pity. I reject both. Aging has been agency for me. Decisions made 10 and 20 years ago that paid on time. Buying long-term care coverage while my hands were steady, checking beneficiaries twice, scanning and backing up, teaching apprentices who might someday carry the bench when I can't. It is craft. Set the blade, read the grain, make the pass you can stand behind. Agency let me show up as a father, not a prop, and to sit quietly in the last pew knowing presence requires no permission. Repair, when it comes, is carpentry. Love is not a speech. It is behavior repeated until it becomes structure. Evan offered a concise apology. I answered with a boundary that could hold weight. Keep choosing for real, not for optics. Time will prove what words cannot. Lila named her mother's courage as her mother's own. That sentence cleared space for honesty to stand. The coach, the neighbors, the apprentices, those hands formed the trust that held the day when a decorative beam failed. I did not build that trust in a weekend. It rose from small choices: a grant form answered after dinner, a hinge fixed on a Tuesday, a shop night kept open even when two people came. Invest in people before you need them. When the wind rises, communities reveal whether you spent your years on veneer or frame. If someone like me asked what to do, I'd say this: secure your documents. Tell one lawyer you trust everything. You will breathe better once one person knows the full map. Keep a written log in ink. Write dates like you mean them. Never sign PDFs you didn't request. Call the vendor directly from a number you found yourself. Keep originals flat. Make legible copies. Store a second set off-site. Draft a single public sentence and repeat it. We trust the process saves you from improvising under heat. And for your own nerves, breathe, count screws along the table apron, touch the tools that outlast panic. Pick the truth you can say at 2 in the morning without editing. Veneer taught me its cost. You can lay a gorgeous face over crushed fiber, tighten the clamps until the seam disappears, and still the joint fails in the first season. Grain tells the truth. Early wood and late wood rings a feast and lean. Families have grain. Corporations do too. Over-tighten to force a look, and failure begins from inside. Ease the clamp, set the blade right. Take a pass thin enough to see light through. The work will keep. I remain the father I was before all this: flannel, shop apron, the man who reads wood to teach patience. The walnut box sits where I can see the inscription without rehearsing speeches. The porch photograph, lines unsoftened, dot half-blurred, no one centered, is my talisman against pretense. The Thursday invitation stays on the table. Open bench, honest work, no scripts. Continuity beats spectacle. If he comes, we'll sharpen a chisel, set a plane, let Walnut teach us again how forward motion sounds when it's true. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. The record remains, exhibits, orders, a forensic report that may someday live in a banker's box. I do not erase it. I choose differently after it. Evan's choices will stack into something time recognizes. Mine will too. Health kept, doors unlocked for neighbors, the scholarship funded on schedule, estate integrity refreshed each spring like oil on a cutting board. Most nights now end in quiet instruction. I tune the plane until it sings a high, clean note, then draw a whisper from cherry so thin it floats before settling at my boots. That ribbon is a sermon I can trust. Remove only what the piece can spare. Reveal what is already there. Stop before pride ruins the surface. I slide the porch photo into a simple frame and set it under glass that throws back my lined face beside it. Two truths share the pain: the life we made that day and the man who learned, late but not too late, what matters. I will not live for the camera. I will live for the joint that holds, the measured cut, the clamp with just enough pressure, the cure time respected, the frame squared even when nobody looks. Appearances weather, integrity seasons. Seasoned work outlasts the storm and becomes the thing tired hands trust when the wind returns. I sweep the shavings into my palm, turn out the shop light, and listen to the house answer with the old reassurance in its studs. Here, here, here. Each beat a proof that strength prefers quiet. In the end, what endures isn't the spotlight, it's the structure. When image was weaponized, the answer wasn't noise but evidence. When pressure tried to pass for care, the reply was consent stated plainly and documented well. There's a quiet bravery in choosing process over performance, timestamps instead of tempers, a steady record in place of a viral scene. Aging doesn't make a life disposable. It sharpens agency for those who plan. Policies kept, wills reviewed, boundaries held. And love, if it hopes to last, becomes behavior repeated until it's strong enough to carry weight. Repair is never a single speech. It's a series of true choices. The lesson is simple and it's sturdy. Appearances weather, integrity seasons. If you've been told to shrink for someone else's aesthetic, remember, presence is its own proof. Build your scaffolding before the storm. Keep your originals flat and your copies ready, and let calm truth do what shouting can't. In a world obsessed with the lens, live for the joint that holds. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey. Your thoughts keep these stories alive. Drop a comment with what resonated most and why. If this spoke to you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss the next story of resilience, justice, and hard-won grace. Until then, take care of your documents, your boundaries, and your heart.